Creating a flowchart. Well, welcome to the first nugget in which we officially create a new Visio drawing. In this one, we're going to start with the flowchart. The flowchart is a pretty bread and butter diagram type in Visio, used all the time in business, and yes, of course, even in IT. A flowchart is going to be used to visualize some sort of process. And what is our life as our IT professionals besides managing processes? You're going to find with Visio that it often helps to get inspiration before you start working. Not everybody has enough imagination to just open a blank document and start from scratch, so we're going to begin this nugget by learning how to find sample diagrams and then just editing those to our needs instead of building a document from scratch. That is exactly what we're going to do in this nugget though. We're going to concentrate on the flowchart templates and understand the differences among the flowchart types, and then we're going to spend the majority of our time in a practical lab environment creating a flowchart. Let's get to work. There's a lot to do in this nugget. In this demonstration, we're going to learn how to create a flowchart diagram in Visio 2010. First of all, just a little bit on nomenclature. You're going to hear me throughout the remainder of this course refer to Visio documents as either drawings or diagrams. Just for the record, friends, there's no functional difference between those words. Drawing and diagram are absolutely synonymous with respect to Visio documents. I just thought I'd clear that up. Now then, let me double left click this file here, nugget01 flowchart.vsd. You can find this as well as all of our Visio product and project files at the nuggetlab.com website. This is the drawing that we're going to replicate, maybe not exactly, but mostly replicate in this nugget. Let me first come down to the status bar. You'll remember our controls that I showed you in an earlier nugget. We can fit the page to the current window with just a single click there. And this is a representative example of a flowchart. I've called it Nugget Lab Flowchart, and you might be thinking, wow, this looks really nice. And I hope you are. I thank you very much for the compliment. But you're wondering, well, gee, how did Tim create this title bar with all this graphical bling? Did he create several rectangles and do layers and do gradient fills and do alpha transparency? The answer to that, friends, is no. It's disarmingly simple to dress up your Visio diagram. And this, in my experience, is what separates the Visio journeyman or journey person, to use politically correct language, from the true Visio power user. A true Visio power user is not only going to create an effective drawing, the actual guts of the drawing as you see here, but he or she also knows how to use the formatting tools to add things like themes. As you see, I've applied a color theme to these shapes, as well as things like page backgrounds and title blocks. And you'll know how all that stuff works by the end of this nugget, and we'll certainly be revisiting the topic several times throughout the rest of this training. So this is basically what we've got going on. Now, one guiding principle, friends, these drawings I've constructed for you, don't pay attention to their contents as such. I mean, this one, let me zoom in here. You can hold down the Shift and Control keys on your keyboard, and you notice when you do that, it changes the mouse cursor to a magnifying glass, and then you can click and drag a marquee with your mouse in order to do a focused zoom. Again, that's Control Shift and then click and drag with your mouse. I use that technique all the time. But the guts of this particular flowchart aren't as important as the skills you're going to learn. This one we're dealing with basically research and development. We have phase 1 trial, and then we have our decision shape. Does the trial meet our goals? Yes or no? And then we have a branch depending upon the answer to that question. If no, then we go back to research and decide whether to cancel the project or continue, in which case we again ask the question, does the phase 1 trial meet our goals? If yes, we proceed to phase 2, and again we ask ourselves, does it meet goals? Yes or no? Blah, blah, blah. And so on down the line. There's phase 3, and then finally we submit the results. Now, many of the drawings that I'm going to be building with you over this training, not all, but many, have been adapted from Microsoft's sample drawings. So that having been said, the question arises, well, cool, if there are sample diagrams that are freely available on the internet that we can adapt for our purposes, how do we obtain those? Well, I'm glad you've asked. We can actually look for Visio sample drawings for fun and for free, either from within the Visio application, or we can do a couple simple Google or Bing searches. One Google search I'd like you to recommend is to search for Visio sample diagrams. And this is a free package that Microsoft unfortunately hasn't updated for several years. But this is a package of 20 sample diagrams that were designed for Visio 2003. So that takes us back quite a few years. It's a 4 megabyte download, but they're really nice. Here's the overview overview right here. The basic flowchart, I believe this is the one that I've adapted for our purposes in this nugget, but you have sample diagrams for just about all of your template types, at least as of Visio 2003. Those should give you some really nice grist for the mill ideas to work with. Another thing you can do is do a search for Visio 2010 or just Visio exercise files, and you can often find educational institutions that, for fun and for free, share Visio sample drawings with you, and you can download and use those. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. Now let me come backstage and select Close to close our finished drawing, which we don't need. We're going to create a flowchart from scratch in just a moment. And let's again stay backstage. And in the Navigating Visio nugget we did, we talked all about the template interface here, the template chooser interface. What I left for this nugget, though, is under Other Ways to Get Started, you have Office.com templates and sample diagrams. Now, assuming that your computer has a connection to the internet, you can download sample diagrams, or actually the sample diagrams exist right on your system. I'm thinking of Office.com templates for internet access. But the sample diagrams, there's not a whole lot of them, but it's certainly enough to get you started. We have asset management, project improvement, project management, project timeline, and you can just select the appropriate template, and you can choose to open the document with or without sample data. I'll choose Open Sample Data. Sample data actually shows you the source file that's being piped into the sample diagram. Let me close out of Excel, and if we click Open, it'll open the sample document. So the sample documents can be useful, especially for more advanced features, like when we have external data tied into a drawing, like you see in this example. And don't be put off by this external data pane and the seeming complexity of the diagram. We're going to know exactly how this works by the end of the training. All right, so let's close out, come backstage again, and from the template picker homepage, we can go to Office.com templates, and this is an awfully nice convenience. We don't have to open a separate instance of Internet Explorer and visit Office.com. We can browse for Visio templates and sample drawings directly from the Visio interface. Isn't that great? So we can select a category, go into a subcategory, and this is a live view of the templates that are available on Office.com. And you'll notice we have some community support here. People can vote on templates. This particular rack diagram is very highly rated, it looks like. Gives us our download size. Now, not all of the templates are provided by Microsoft. This one is. Some of them are community generated, so you can actually contribute, and I would suggest you do that as a way of giving back to the Visio community. Once your Visio skills are high enough, you can create sample diagrams and templates and submit them to Office.com yourself to share the wealth with other users around the world. You'll notice that when you click download, we're actually downloading that drawing, and away we go. Let me bring out my shapes pane, and sure enough, this sample drawing has appropriate stencils loaded, and it has data already in here. Let's again use our Control-Shift mouse drag technique to zoom in. You see here that you can create extremely detailed server and telco closet rack diagrams. This one shows generic hardware, but something that you really should know as an IT professional, and what we'll cover later in the course in a dedicated nugget, is that many hardware vendors like Dell, IBM, and so forth have their own Visio stencils and their own Visio shapes that map exactly to their products. So you can actually build a rack diagram that includes representations of actual products. And even more than that, this is pretty amazing when you think about it. Let me zoom in really tight here. You can get right down to the port level and add metadata to completely document how your switches, how your routers, how your devices are set up. Visio is much more than just a simple line drawing application. You need to really understand that. So let's close out of that file and let's get started with the meat and potatoes of this nugget, which is creating a flowchart diagram. Come backstage, new, make sure we're on the template homepage, and in template categories, let's select the flowchart category. Now, flowcharts again are meant to represent some process. This could be software development. It could be, if you manage a help desk, how you want your calls structured. Any process that involves decisions and branching can be nicely visualized using a flowchart. You can even use flowcharts as a brainstorming diagram. There is a separate template for brainstorming, but I myself have used flowcharts for that reason as well. The basic flowchart is what we're going to use in this nugget. It's a nice starting point that has your traditional flowchart shapes, but you notice we have BPMN, for business process modeling notation. This is a standard for doing business-oriented flowcharting. Cross-functional flowchart is also a very popular flowchart type. What's different about the cross-functional flowchart, as you see, it's broken into these swim lanes that show responsibility for part of the process. In other words, the initial part of this process could be the IT department. This decision might be the IT manager's responsibility, and the lowest part could be yet another team that's responsible for those steps. IDEF 0, again, this is a specific process methodology. SDL, same thing. Bottom line is, if you're using any of those specifications in your shop, you'll know exactly what's meant by those shapes. Graphical workflow, and then SharePoint workflow. SharePoint, this is especially cool if you have the premium edition of Visio and you're running SharePoint Server 2010. As this says in the blurb, you can actually interact with SharePoint directly. A workflow in SharePoint, by the way, is kind of like an automated flowchart. It's a business process that can handle just about anything document or task related. It's very, very rich and robust. You can check out my training that I've done for CBT Nuggets on SharePoint 2007 or SharePoint 2010, where we learn all about workflows. But bottom line, you can import workflows and export workflows from and to SharePoint directly in Visio. Very, very cool indeed. So what we're doing, as we know, is creating a basic flowchart. So we'll select the template, choose our units, and click Create to spawn an instance of that template. And you also notice that I have my ribbon minimized. I'm going to double left click a ribbon tab to bring it down. And of course we want our shapes window, so we'll keep that here. And there's our drawing page. We can review what's going on as far as page setup by navigating to the Design ribbon tab, and we can change our orientation if we want to. If we're going to match the drawing that I gave you earlier, we'll want to make that portrait. So why don't we make that happen now? And we can change the paper size with just a click of the mouse. I'm going to leave it at standard 8.5 inch by 11 inch letter, and we'll go from there. Let's come back to the Home tab. The way I tend to work myself when creating Visio drawings is that I take care of the guts, or the main part of the drawing first, and then once that's pretty much finalized, then I concentrate on making it look pretty. That's what we'll do here. First thing we're going to do is drag out a process shape to the drawing page. Now, the way to add a shape to a drawing, it's just a drag and drop procedure. It's very easy. Click and hold your left mouse button, drag the shape anywhere onto the page, and let go. If you hold down Shift and Control and just click your mouse, you'll gradually zoom in at subsequent levels. I'm going to zoom in pretty tight here because I want you to see details of these shapes. Another tool I want you to be aware of right off the top is on the Home ribbon, Pointer tool in the Tools group. This is your main general purpose tool as you're creating drawings. You notice that we can change our tool to the connector, to the text, and depending upon what tool we're using, and we're going to get to all these other tools in subsequent nuggets, you'll find that your mouse pointer looks a little bit different depending upon what you're doing, and you'll find that you sometimes can't do what you want to do. For instance, if I wanted to select a shape when I have another tool selected, like connector. I didn't want to draw a connector. I wanted to draw a marquee selection around that box. Remember that undo is your friend. You can come up to the quick access toolbar and click undo. You have multi-level undo supported just like in any other Microsoft Office application. And when in doubt, make sure that you've selected the pointer tool. That's going to be a tip that's going to keep you in very good stead throughout the course. Now, once a shape is on the page, I want to draw your attention to a few behaviors just so we know exactly what's going on. First of all, notice that when you hover over a selected shape, or even when you select the shape, you get a lot of markup added to the shape. It's dynamic markup because you notice if I click off the shape, it's just the shape alone. When you hover over the shape, you get those 4 blue arrows. Those are what are referred to as auto connect arrows, and those can make it really easy to add additional shapes to your drawing. Again, you hover over the shape, and then if you hover over one of the arrows, you see a little pop-up that shows you 4 shapes that look like they're pretty common shapes, and in fact they are. And you notice that as you hover over each one, you see a connector and that shape appear. But if you don't click and just keep moving your mouse, it disappears. Again, that's what's called called Auto Connect. It's a nice way to do especially flowchart diagrams. Now, if by contrast you come over a shape and left click it once to select it, you see that we have what's called a bounding box. That's the dashed line that represents the perimeter of the given shape. And you also see resize handles. Now, if you've worked in Windows applications for a while, then you already know how these resize handles work. Basically, the ones that are on the sides and top allow you to do a non-proportional resize. That is, you can shrink up a box to make it more rectangular, or if you come to the sides, you can again make it wider or shorter, depending. The corner handles, if you just click and drag any of them, allow you to do two-axis resizing of a shape. In other words, it increases both the height and width of the shape at the same time, as you see. The circle that appears at the top middle of the shape, this little ball icon, is a free rotate shape. And what this does when you hover over it, you notice that your mouse pointer turns into a circle, screen tip says rotate shape, and you see a little dot in the middle. This represents the pivot point or the center of rotation for that shape. And I tend to leave that alone. You'll find that it's almost always in the middle of the shape. And what that means is that you can click and drag your mouse to rotate any shape along that axis of rotation in any of 360 degrees, you see? This can be especially helpful for more advanced drawings. Click off the shape and we're back in business. So those are the basic view mechanics of a shape. The auto connect arrows that appear when you hover over a shape, the resize handles, the rotate option, and the center of rotation option. To move a shape around the page, what you do is just come anywhere inside the shape. You know you're in the appropriate area when you have a four-headed arrow attached to your mouse cursor. Click and hold your left mouse button, drag and drop. That's all there is to it. Another way to quickly select shapes, and this is just review for those of you who have experience with Office, is to click and hold outside the shape and draw a selection rectangle. As long as the objects are contained within the bounds of your selection rectangle, they will be selected. All right? So I'm going to now delete this shape. That's the final thing I want to show you about basic shape management. That involves selecting the shape and hitting delete on your keyboard. Now, of course, you can always undo deletes or redo deletes using your undo and redo commands respectively. Alrighty then, let's again bring out process. And to add text to a shape, all you have to do is start typing. Now, the shape has to be selected. I'm typing now on my keyboard and nothing's happening. But watch when I click the shape once to select it and type Phase 1 Trial. Click anywhere outside of the shape, and I have now a text label attached to the shape. All shapes have some text label available to them, and I'll show you in future drawings how to take this text label and move it outside the shape if you want to. Now, our next shape, you'll remember, is the decision shape, and there's a couple ways to add additional shapes to a drawing. As I mentioned, the auto connect arrows work especially well for flowchart diagrams. And basically what's happening here is when you hover over, you get the top four shapes of the selected stencil. Now, I have the basic flowchart shape stencil selected, and the top four shapes by default are process, decision, sub-process, and start, end. So again, if I hover over autocorrect, you see those. The idea here, friends, is you can quickly spawn new shapes using auto connect, and you can move other shapes into one of the first four positions if you'd prefer to use those. For instance, if we were using a lot of data shapes and not all that many start, end shapes, you can click and drag data. You see that vertical line? That shows where your shape will be placed when you release the mouse. Now if we hover over an auto connect arrow, you see that that data shape is part of the top four. This is a new feature in Visio 2010 that I think you should really pay a lot of attention to. Now, if you go to the View ribbon tab under Visual Aids, you'll see that auto connect is controlled with a checkbox here. So if for whatever reason you don't like auto connect, you can turn it off in your diagram by just unticking that box, and then you'll find that whether selecting or hovering over a shape, you no longer get the auto connect boxes. Well, I like auto connect, so I'm going to hover over and select a decision shape. Now, what happened there is two things actually. We had a connector and a new shape spawn. I'm going to label this decision by selecting it once and adding my text. By the way, you can add multiple rows of text by using the Enter key. You can use backspace. Just all of your traditional font management controls work just fine with these shapes. I'm now going to use auto connect again to bring out a process shape, and we'll call this Phase 2 Trial. Good deal. Now, you'll notice that if you remember the Nugget Lab flowchart diagram, we have two prongs coming out of meet goals. We have a no and a yes option. We would want to go to phase 2 trial if the answer is yes. Remember I mentioned that every shape has a text associated with it, a text item associated with it. That pertains even to lines and connectors. So we can select this connector and then add our text directly to it. Isn't that great? See how easy this is? Let's use the scroll bar to come over a little bit. We'll use our scroll boxes to make sure we're zoomed in. And now instead of auto connect, I'll temporarily turn off auto connect to make sure it doesn't get invoked accidentally. I want to show you how to connect shapes manually. Let's take another process shape, bring it out into the drawing, and notice that depending upon where you're dragging that shape, you get little guides. Do you see to the lower left corner of the rectangle those arrows? Or now, you see that? I don't know what color that is because I'm colorblind, but those are dynamically generated alignment guides. What that refers to is a feature of Visio called the dynamic grid. And again, just FYI, that can be turned on or turned off also from the View tab. And as the screen tip tells us, dynamic grid guides assist in the sizing, spacing, and alignment of shapes in relation to one another. I love the dynamic grid because sometimes I can be a little OCD, quite honestly, with making sure that my shapes are lined up. You notice that if I let go here, I can rest assured that this shape is right in line horizontally with our meet goals shape. Dynamic grid we're going to see in every nugget going forward. It works in both directions in terms of horizontal and vertical spacing. In fact, let me quickly spawn a page, zoom in a little. What I just did here is hold down Shift and use the mouse scroll wheel. There are several different ways to do any task in Visio in case you didn't already know. So I'm going to be giving you those shortcuts organically as we go along, and yes, I'll be reviewing them a lot. So again, that's hold down Control and use your mouse wheel on your mouse to do very nice smooth zooming. And let's bring out some shapes here. I'll just bring out 6 process shapes here. Now if I want to line up these guys really quickly, you see the guide show up, and you also see, depending upon where you're going, you also see those horizontal alignment arrows too. So you can quickly line up and space diagrams on the dynamic grid. There's a vertical alignment indicator. There's one that shows that we're lined up horizontally and vertically, and this shows horizontal, vertical, and spacing made just so. Isn't that great? Dynamic grid for you. Let's come back to page 1 now, and we'll label this back to research. And now the question comes up, how do we add connectors? It was nice that auto connect did that for us. Well, now we're doing it manually. Remember I mentioned the tools. If we come back to home, the pointer tool is our main tool that we use most of the time in Visio. Connector is also extremely helpful. Connector allows us to create what are called static connections. You notice that number 1, you see on the mouse pointer it has a little connector icon as well as a little representation of a connection point, that little cross. Every shape in Visio has several connection points. Now in previous versions of Visio, those connection points were always visible. They look like little X's. Nowadays though, they only show up when you hover near a shape, like right now. As I've brought the connector close to the shape, you should see that on each corner of the meets goals shape, you see a little blue X. Visio is extremely flexible on where you can attach connection points. Although each shape has built-in connection points on each vertex, and also you can add a connection point to the inside of the shape. You notice if I bring the connector inside the shape, the outline goes around the entire shape. I don't want that now. I just want to add a connection to this connection point. Left click and drag over until I hit the connection point on the research box. You notice that when you get a little red box show up, that's what's called a glue indicator. Now gluing a shape, let me come back to the pointer tool, means that the connection stays there regardless of where you drag the shapes. And when you create a static connector, that means that you're telling Visio, I always want this corner of meets goals attached to this corner of the back to research. You notice if I drag over to the left, Visio reroutes that connector and creates a line jump over the yes connector. connector. So sometimes static connectors aren't all that flexible, quite honestly. You have to be careful. What's nice about AutoConnect is that the connections are dynamic. They reroute dynamically. Let me show you what I mean. You'll remember that phase 1 trial is connected dynamically to meet goals, and right now the bottom center and the top connection points are connected. But watch this. If I come over to the left of meets goals, now that dynamic connector uses the right center connection point of resize 1 trial and the left connection of meet goals. That's the difference between what's called a static connection and a dynamic connection, and also you'll see that referred to as static glue versus dynamic glue respectively. Let's add another static connector to link up back to research with phase 1 trial. Now you can just drag directly over. You don't have to go up and over. You'll notice that Visio is smart enough to create right angles where appropriate. And yes, you can adjust those right angles all day long. There's no doubt about that. We need to add some text to this connector. Your best bet is to come back to the pointer tool, select the line, and then add your text. In this case, meets goals, yes. We go to phase 2. I'm going to add the text no to this line, back to research. Let's add another shape here. We have another decision to be concerned with, whether we're going to continue. Let me use the control mouse zoom to come out a little bit. Sometimes when you're too close, it's hard to see the forest for the trees. Now that we're zoomed out, we see that I haven't routed these exactly right. Phase 2 trial has another meets goals item. Let me come back to view and do an auto connect and quickly add that in. Meets goals, and that's going to again be a yes or no. If it's yes, we're going to have a phase 3 trial. Then we're going to ask ourselves again, does it meet goals? And if yes, we don't have a top 4 shape here, so we're going to have to bring out a start end, come back home, drop in a connector, easy peasy, and we'll select it and add our appropriate text. Let's come back to pointer tool. All right, now let's see where we went wrong. It looks like meets goals no after phase 1 trial does go to back to research, and then we ask, are we going to continue? And then continue yes goes back to phase 1 trial. So it looks like this connector should actually be over on continue, and this is a good teaching moment. Let me zoom in and I'll show you how to replace connectors. You don't have to just add connectors to shapes, you also can remove them and reroute them. Check this out. Having the pointer tool selected, you can detach a connector just by clicking and dragging. See? So we've unassociated that line, that connector, from back to research, and we'll add it to continue. Sometimes the other side of it might get unplugged as well, so you know how to rewire that now, no big deal. If it's going to be a continue no, then we're going to cancel the project. So let's bring out a start end and let's add a connector. You notice that the direction of your connector matters. Let me actually undo. And if I were to do a connector this way, it's drawing the arrow down to up instead of up to down. Now that's not a problem. You can do several things. You can just undo and then recreate the arrow by moving in the appropriate direction. You can, from the Home tab Arrange area, open Position and flip vertical. You could rotate it with your mouse. A lot of different ways to go here. You're next to never stuck with Visio is basically what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, so let's add our text here by selecting the connector. No. If we're going to continue, yes, we've already handled that. So let's come out to full page, do a drag view, see what we've got going on. Meets goals, no, yes. Continue, yes, no. Phase 2 trial, meets goals. We're going to add a yes to this to take us into the phase 3 trial. And if no, we'll add a connector, back to research. Select pointer, select the connector. Phase 2 trial, meets goals, yes. And if no, we're going to back to research. I'll add it to the top. And again, those line jumps are added automatically by Visio. It's very handy of Visio to do that for us. Select the connector, make that no. Good, so let's come down to the status bar and look at the entire diagram and see what's going on. It looks okay. It looks fairly good so far. But you notice that the way I've constructed it is it's kind of skewed off on the page a little bit. There's a couple different ways we can address that. So long as our pointer tool is selected, we can draw a lasso around the entire thing, around the entire drawing, and then come inside with your mouse. Come inside the selection with your mouse, and note that you can drag the entire drawing. Isn't that cool? And not only that, you can scale the entire drawing as long as the entire thing is selected selected, I'll come to normally the lower right, and you notice the screen tip says resize this group. Check this out. Now if you go too far, it's going to spawn a separate page. I don't want to do that, but I can make it larger, and then this is again a favorite technique of mine. You can use a nudge to do pixel by pixel adjustments. I'm using the arrow keys on my keyboard. Alright, so that looks quite a bit better. Sometimes you'll find with more complicated flowcharts that you have a hard time getting the layout just right. Let me minimize the shapes window. We really don't need that anymore. And let's click the zoom button and do a page width. So we might be thinking, well, you know, this looks a little bit crowded, but I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to go through a half hour relaying out all the shapes manually. Is there a better way to do that? In Visio 2010 there is. It's at least worth a try. It's not perfect, but like I said, it's worth a try. This is over on the Design ribbon tab. In the Layout group, you have an option to relay out the page. And this is where we let Visio try to reposition the shapes in a way that it thinks is a little more logical. And you notice that this gallery has several sections: flowchart, hierarchy, compact tree, radial, and circular. And I also want you to see that when you hover over an option, Visio gives you a live preview of what that option looks like. As long as you don't click, it's not going to make it go into effect. Okay? Compact tree spreads it out, and you notice the dashed lines you're seeing on the page. Those are page divisions. So it looks like if we really wanted a compact tree, we would probably have to do a group resize like I showed you a minute or so ago in order such that it all fits on the page. Radial, that's kind of nice actually. And then circular, I don't know about that. That stretches out way too bit. Now you don't have to select any of these options. You can go to more layout options that gives you those presets. It actually gives you more control over those presets. But if no other reason, it's a nice way to just get some additional input on how you might go about reconnecting those shapes. And also on the Design ribbon tab, Layout group connectors, let me Control Shift and then draw a box with my mouse to come in tight. You can customize how these jumps occur. Now, frankly, I try to avoid line jumps wherever possible. Really, this connector here is what's giving us the problems as far as requiring us to use line jumps. But if you want to use a different line jump style, for instance, under connectors here, you can choose to either A, show or hide line jumps. You may not want to see them at all. You just have intersecting lines. The connectors option allow you to change up how the actual connectors work. Right angle is the default. You can have them curve or do straight lines alternatively. Now, the reason why that's affecting just the one connector is I just have the one connector selected. If you don't have any connectors selected and you make a change, then it's going to affect them all. Now, if we hit the Layout dialog box launcher, this brings up the Page Setup dialog box, and in particular the Layout and Routing tab. This is important if you want to customize those line jumps. Let me actually come back and turn on line jumps and then hit the dialog box launcher. And what I want to show you here is you can selectively add line jumps just to horizontal lines, just to vertical lines, and the line jump style, you're not limited to the arc. That's the default. You can choose gap. Let me click apply and show you that. You can hit square if you want squares, two sides. I mean, there's lots and lots of options here. It's pretty crazy. I'm going to just come back to arc. But I want you to see that that's eminently possible. You hold down Control Shift and right mouse click. That'll take your zoom out one level at a time. And what I'll do now is show you how to quickly adjust the formatting of your shapes. Let me come back home and make sure we're on the pointer tool. If I feel that that font's a little bit too small, I can select the shape, any shape really, with my mouse, come up to the font area. I'm just going to use the increase font size button a couple times, bring it up to 10-point bold, and then if I want to apply that formatting to other shapes, I like the Format Painter. This has been around for a long time in Microsoft Office. If you click Format Painter once and then click another shape, it's going to pick up any formatting you've done to the selected shape, the originally selected one. And that doesn't pertain just to the font. That pertains to the fill color, the line color, shadow options, you name it. I just made a single change to the font here. Now, if you want to apply formats multiple times, you can double left click the Format Painter and then just quickly zap all of the other elements in the drawing. I'm going to zap not only the shapes, but also the connector text to bring them up. I'm going to have to reactivate here again. Point them out there. No, no, and yes. You can turn off Format Painter by left-clicking again. We better save our work before we go any further. I'm going to save this to my desktop as Nugget 1 project file. Good deal. Let's come out full page and see what we've got going on. It's looking pretty nice. Now, if we come over to design, we can edit some of the things like fill color, line color, shape color, all that using these themes. This is pretty cool, and it also gives you a live preview. You notice as you hover over these themes on the Design tab Themes group, it gives you a preview of what to expect. If you open up the gallery, you can look at all of them. Really, one at a time. Just click them. Some of them are neat because they involve rounded corners, like this guy right here. You notice that we can apply the theme to new shapes or not with just a click of the mouse. I'm going to choose this one. I know it's different from the project diagram, but we're not out to just completely duplicate it. We want to add our own interpretation and flavor. Now you notice that this theme added rounded corners not only to the shapes, but also it made changes, drop shadows, and rounded nature to our connectors as well. Wow, that's pretty sharp, isn't it? Well, we're getting about ready to produce this final product, and we'll stay here on the Design tab to finish that out. You'll notice here that in the Backgrounds area, we can apply a background style to a page very easily. You simply open the gallery up and select a background. Boom. I think that it's making my blocks look a little dark. I'm going to change the theme on the fly. You notice you can always change it. Borders and titles is what gives us the title block that you saw earlier. Let me choose this guy, Urban. And again, I'm going to use my drag technique to zoom in tight. This is just a placeholder here that you can double left click. To edit the background, we can come over to the background page. It comes in as a background. We'll zoom in tight, double left click the placeholder block, and add our title. Click off of it, and it's done. This particular title block includes a date field. We can choose to delete if we want to. Just click it and press delete. And also in the lower right, we have a page number field. It says page 0. I'm going to select that and delete that. We don't want that. Come back to page 1, come back to a full screen view and save our changes. And that's looking pretty darn nice, isn't it? I guess we can call this complete at this point. If you want to know what this is going to look like printed, we can always come backstage down to print and select print preview. Shows us, at least on a color printer, exactly what this is going to look like. Let's close print preview, save our work again, and close Visio. Project complete. Creating a flowchart review. Well, congratulations, friends. You finally got some boots on the ground practical experience with Visio. How does it feel thus far? To recap what we learned in this nugget, we started by looking at the various and sundry ways that we can obtain sample diagrams to give us inspiration for our actual production Visio work. We then looked at the built-in flowchart templates. You understand the purpose of those. And most importantly now, you know how to create a flowchart from scratch, make it print ready, electronic shareable ready, and it is my hope you now have much more confidence in the application. We're going to be building upon all the skills we learned in each successive nugget, such that by the end of the course, you're going to have a very broad and deep skill set with the product. I'm excited, and I hope you are too. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.